While thinking about all these changes, he could not refrain from heaving a heavy sigh and said in his heart, "Playing practical jokes like this is wronger and Big Brother's just delight. It's a pity that one is nowhere near, the other has already died. Someday I will see wronger again, but I will never be able to tell this story to Big Brother Zoo." Early morning on the next day, Hong Shigong called Aoyanke and proudly told him, "The old beggar's martial art is already unique. I don't need to see all kinds of 9-yin manual. As a matter of fact, even if you show the manual in front of my face, I won't even cast a glance to it. Only some bird brain whose martial art is useless would be dying to steal all kinds of gold and silver. Tell your dog uncle that the manual will be written just for him. Tell him to shut himself up and train hard. And when it is done, to come to the old beggar to test his newfound skill. The manual naturally is a good thing, but I don't want to look at it even with one eye. I want to see if with the manual's help he would be able to defeat the old beggar. I want to see whether after he has painstakingly practiced the martial arts from the manual he won't just equal to with the old beggar. Ilse is just taking off his pants to fart. Totally useless." Aoyang Feng was actually standing behind his cabin door, so he heard everything, but he was delighted instead of getting angry. "It's a very good thing the old beggar is very proud. He doesn't mind letting me have the manual," he thought. "Otherwise, even if I fight him, threaten him with snakes or poison, or I starve him to death, it would still be difficult to force him." "Uncle Hong, you are wrong," Aoyanke said. "My uncle's martial art has reached perfection. With Uncle Hong's ability, you could not gain even half a move advantage. So why would Uncle want to learn the 9-yin manual? My uncle once told little nephew that he is convinced the 9-yin manual had enjoyed undeserved reputation. Otherwise, when Wang Chongyang won the book, why didn't he learn anything from it and demonstrate it in front of everybody? My uncle wants to take a look at it to point out the errors and prove that the manual is actually a hoax. Won't you say that it will benefit the Wulin world tremendously?" Hong Shigong burst out in laughter. "You are blindly blowing your horn too hard," he mocked. "Jinger, go ahead and write the manual from your memory. If the old poison can point out an error in the 9-yin manual, the old beggar will kowtow to him." Go Jing said yes and came out. Aoyanke led him to the big cabin where there was a stack of paper and some ink stick. He even prepared the ink himself and respectfully waited on the side. Go Jing's school years were not too many, his handwriting was shoddy. Oftentimes he had to think the characters he had to write. So he worked very slowly. More than once he did not know how to write a certain character, so he had to ask Aoyanke to write it for him. Working until noon that day, he barely finished the first half of the first volume. Aoyang Feng did not show himself at all, but every time Go Jing finished writing a page, Aoyanke would take that page and gave it to his uncle. Aoyang Feng looked at them carefully. Some sentences did not make any sense to him, but even though shoddy, the characters were clear. He thought those sentences must have very deep meaning behind them. So when he was back to the West, he would slowly digest the manual. He believed with his intelligence and ability he would eventually understand the manual thoroughly. And after a dozen years or so he would master the entire martial arts from the manual. He could not help but feel elated. He knew Go Jing was dumb. He also noticed Go Jing's handwriting was so plain and naive, almost childlike. He believed this kind of person would not be able to fabricate a complex manual such as this one. Besides, his nephew had told him that many characters Go Jing knew the sounds, but did not know how to write, so his nephew had to teach him or write the characters himself. So without a doubt this was the real manual. How would he know that this dumb kid had conspired with his master to deliberately alter the manual and so deceive him? As for the confusing sentences, he blamed that on Go Jing's inability to remember the text correctly. Go Jing did not stop writing even though the sky had turned dark. He had finished more than half of the second volume. Aoyang Feng did not allow him to return to his cabin for fear that Hong Shigong would influence him to change his mind and make things difficult for him. even though he had already had most of the manual in his hands. He wanted to have the complete manual. So he arranged for a sumptuous meal and wine to be brought to Go-jing. Let Go-jing continue to write without interruption. Hong Shigong waited until about the end of the 9 p.m. but did not see Go-jing came back. He felt queasy, afraid that Ouyang Feng had discovered their scheme and his dumb disciple might suffer the worst. He sneaked out of his cabin and quietly walked toward the main cabin. There were 2 snake shepherds stood guard in front of the main cabin. Hong Shigong sent his left palm forward, creating a gust of wind, making the sail rope moved. Those 2 snake shepherds heard the noise and looked around while Hong Shigong had already moved to the right. His movement was so quick that those 2 did not see anything. They thought it was a ghost or something. Very soon Hong Shigong was at the starboard of the main cabin. Hong Shigong could see a faint glow coming out of the main cabin's window. He took a peek inside and saw Go-jing was still crouching on the desk, writing. 2 white-dressed maidens stood beside him, busily serving tea, or lighting some incense, or replenishing some papers, or preparing some more ink. Go-jing was well taken care of. Hong Shigong was relieved. But then his nostrils caught a scent of the wine. He fixed his gaze for a long time and saw in front of Go-jing a cup of amber-brown aged wine. The color is almost rouge, the sweet fragrance attacking his nose mercilessly. Hong Shigong secretly cursed. The old poison is very stingy. Just because my disciple writes for him, he serves the best wine to entertain him, while for the old beggar he only serves insipid cheap wine. He was the world's #1 glutton and drunkard. Seeing his disciple with this kind of excellent wine, how could he restrain himself from wanting some of that wine? The old poison must have stored the good wine in the boat's hold downstairs. I am going to drink for his happiness, then replace the wine with my urine. Let him taste the old beggar's own brewed urine wine. Compared to what the old beggar and his disciple went through with the sharks, his drinking of some urine in his wine won't be too bad. At least he won't die because of it. Having this thought, he could not help but smile. Stealing wine and food was the skill he most proud of. Once he spent 3 whole months inside the imperial palace in Linan. He hid on a beam in the imperial kitchen. He had tasted practically every single food and wine that was supposed to be served to the emperor. The imperial palace was heavily guarded, yet he was able to come and go like there were no other people there. Stealing food and wine from a boat's kitchen certainly would not give him any trouble. Immediately he looked for the steps that would lead him downstairs, and after making sure nobody was watching, he carefully went downstairs, relying on his nose to find where the food supply was. The hold was pitch black, but Hong Shigong's nose was able to smell food from a mile away. Slowly he walked along the wall, lighted his torch just to see 6, 7 wooden barrels piled up in the corner. Hong Shigong was delighted. He extinguished the fire after picking up a broken bowl he found laying around and put it back in his pocket. He walked groping around toward the barrel and tried to lift one up. The barrel was very heavy, it could contain anything. His left hand he found the plug, while his right hand placed the bowl under it. He was about to pull the plug when suddenly his sensitive ears heard some footsteps. It looked like there were 2 people walking toward the hold. Their steps were nimble, so Hong Shigong knew they were Ouyang Feng uncle and nephew, since nobody on board had that kind of ability. He thought those 2 came to the boat hold late at night. They must have some evil intentions, like poisoning the food to harm others. So he shrunk his body and hid curled up among the barrels. He heard the door open quietly, a flame flashed, and 2 people walked in. They stopped right in front of the barrels. Hong Shigong's heart skipped a beat. Are they going to poison the wine? He wondered in his heart. But what he heard next turned his heart cold. Have you placed oil, firewood and sulfur in each cabin? He heard Ouyang Feng asked. Ouyang Ke laughed. Everything is ready. As soon as we start the fire, this boat will turn into ashes and the stinky beggar will be scorched to death instantly. They are going to burn the boat? Hong Shigong was shocked. We must wait a little bit longer, Ouyang Feng said. As soon as that kid's surname Go falls asleep, you go first to the lifeboat. Just be really careful not to wake the old beggar up. He'll come over here and light up the fire. What are we going to do with those maidservants and the snake shepherds? Awayanke asked. The stinky beggar is a great master of this age. It's worthy of his reputation to sacrifice some people to accompany him in his death, Aoyang Feng coldly said. While still talking, their hands did not stay idle. They unplugged the barrel and the smell of oil attacked Hong Shigong's nose. Turned out the barrels were full of vegetable oils. Aoyang Feng uncle and nephew also took some sulfur from a stack of wooden boxes, some firewood and sacks of wood shavings from the shelves, and scattered them on the floor. Not too long afterward they have finished their job and turned around to go out when Aoyang laughed and said, Uncle, in less than 2 hours that kid's surname Go will be buried in the sea. The only person who knows the 9-yin manual will be just you, Senior. No, there will be 2. Won't I pass it on to you? Aoyang Feng replied. Aoyang was delighted. He pushed the door closed with the back of his hand. Hong Shigong was furious and shocked at the same time. He thought if there was no ghost or spirit telling him to steal some wine, how would he found out these 2 people's treacherous plan? If the boat was suddenly on fire, how would he escape the disaster? After could not hear the footsteps of those 2 anymore, he carefully sneaked out and went back to his own cabin. Go Jing had already gone back and was sleeping soundly on the bed. He was about to wake him up and discuss what they were going to do when suddenly there was a slight rustling noise outside the door. He knew it must be Aoyang Feng trying to see if they were sound asleep, so he pretended to talk in his sleep. Good wine. Good wine. I want 10 more pots. Aoyang Feng was startled. At first he thought the old beggar was still awake, drinking wine, but then Hong Shigong cried out loud again, Old poison. Let us fight for another 1,000 stances, giggling good boy. That was awesome. Standing outside the door, Aoyang Feng listened to him speaking nonsense. He was confused, but then realized that Hong Shigong was talking in his sleep. This stinky beggar's death is imminent, yet he still drinks and fights in his dream, he thought. With his mouth Hong Shigong talked nonsense, but with his ears he listened attentively. Aoyang Feng's lightness kung fu was superb, but Hong Shigong was still able to hear him walking toward the port side of the boat. Hong Shigong put his mouth on Go Jing's ear and lightly shook his shoulder. Jinger. He whispered. Go Jing awoke. Just follow my lead, don't ask any question, Hong Shigong said urgently. Get out quietly, make sure nobody's watching you. Go Jing rolled over and crawled quietly toward the door. Hong Shigong silently opened the door and tugging Go Jing's sleeve they moved toward the starboard. He was afraid they would be detected by Aoyang Feng. So instead of jumping out he climbed over the edge. With his left hand hanging on the edge, his right hand pulled Go Jing along. Both of them hanging outside the boat's side. Go Jing felt strange, but did not dare to make any noise. Hong Shigong slowly released his hands from the edge and quietly crawled downward, keeping his eyes on Go Jing for fear that the boat was too slippery for him, that if he should fall, he would surely make noise. The boat was smoothly painted, plus, it was wet. Secondly, they were going downward, where the boat was sloping toward the water. Thirdly, the boat was moving above the waves that made the boat rocked. So climbing downward was truly not an easy matter. Luckily Go Jing was trained by Ma Yu going up and down the cliff every day in the desert. Besides, his skill had been improved tremendously this past year or so. He would stick his fingers in between the wood plank, or grab the head of a nail, or find a crack somewhere. Slowly but steadily going down. Half of Hong Shigong's body was already underwater. He moved toward the stern, with Go Jing following close behind. His target was the small lifeboat tied on a rope behind the boat. Get on that boat, he told Go Jing. He loosened up his grip and separated his body from the big boat. The big boat was traveling quite fast, so a second later Hong Shigong had grabbed the edge of the small boat. swing his hands, his body somersaulted and landed on the small boat without making any sound. When Go Jing had followed his example, he quietly said, "Cut off the rope." Go Jing took the dagger out, and a moment later that small boat was floating freely on the ocean waves. Hong Shigong pulled the oar to give themselves some distance from the big boat. A moment later the big boat disappeared into the darkness. Suddenly a flame was seen on the big boat's stern. It came from the torch in Ouyang Feng's hand. Ouyang Feng was heard shouting in alarm because the small lifeboat was nowhere to be seen. He sounded shocked, but also angry and afraid at the same time. Hong Shigong concentrated his Shi in the Dantian region and let out a long laugh. Out of nowhere another boat appeared, coming rapidly toward the starboard of the big boat. Hong Shigong wondered, what boat is that? Before he finished speaking, a pair of white eagles came down from the sky, circling the big boat's mainsail. Someone dressed in white was seen leaving the incoming boat, leaping toward the big boat. Under the bright starlight above, one could see a glimmer of golden hairband on her head. Wronger. Go Jing gasped. The person who was just leaping onto the big boat was indeed Huang Rong. Just before leaving the Peach Blossom Island, she saw the little red horse came galloping from the forest. She thought, this little red horse is useless on the sea, but those two condors would actually be able to help me find Brother Jing. Therefore, she whistled loudly to call the white eagles. The eagles' eyes are sharp, they can fly extremely fast. On this boundless sea they unexpectedly saw Go Jing on the big boat. Huang Rong was alarmed, but also pleasantly surprised to find the endanger message Go Jing tied on the eagle's leg. Immediately she let the eagles soar to the sky and steered the boat following them. Eventually her boat caught up with the big boat, but she was a little bit too late. Hong Shigong and Go Jing had already left the big boat. Huang Rong had never forgotten the endanger message she got earlier. She was afraid she might be too late. Hence, as soon as the eagles circled above this boat, she ordered her crew to sail alongside the big boat. As soon as the distance was manageable with a butterfly steel projectile in her hand, she leaped to the big boat, only to see Ouyang Feng was pacing around nervously, like an ant on a hot pot. "Where is Go Jing?" Huang Rong shouted. "What did you do to him?" Ouyang Feng had lighted the fire in the hold and was going to escape using the small lifeboat when suddenly he saw the boat was gone. His perspiration came down his forehead like beads or pearl when he heard Hong Shigong's loud and long laughter. He silently cursed his own stupidity, because instead of harming others he had harmed himself. Of course he was very anxious. But suddenly Huang Rong arrived on a boat. He rushed to grab this opportunity, quickly seized that boat. He shouted. Who would have thought that the crews of Huang Rong's boat were all deaf and mute servants from the island? As long as Huang Rong was on board, they followed her commands out of fear, but as soon as Huang Rong left the boat, immediately they turned the boat around, hoisted the sail and escaped as far as they could. Not long after Hong Shigong and Go Jing saw Huang Rong jumped onto the big boat, the fire from the hold was starting to reach the deck. Go Jing did not know what happened yet. He called out in alarm, "Fire! Fire!" "That's right," Hong Shigong said. "The old poison set the boat on fire to burn the two of us, master and disciple, to death." Go Jing had a blank expression on his face. He busily said, "We must save Wronger. Let's go back to the boat," Hong Shigong said. With all his might Go Jing pulled the oar. That big boat was also changed its direction to approach this small lifeboat. The deck was full of male snake shepherds and female maidservants running around chaotically, shouting for help. Hong Shigong had to raise his voice to be heard. "Wronger, Jinger and I are here. Quickly swim over. Quick." On the sea the mighty waves rolled. The night was dark, so it was very dangerous to swim. But Hong Shigong knew Huang Rong's water skill was excellent, and also it was a critical moment, so he was compelled to take this risk. Huang Rong heard her master's voice. She was delighted. No longer paying attention toward Ouyang Feng uncle and nephew, she rushed to the boat's side and jumped into the water below. But suddenly she felt something was holding her back. Huang Rong turned her head in great surprise to see her right wrist in Ouyang Feng's hand. "Let me go!" she shouted, sending her left fist toward Ouyang Feng's face. As a result, both of her wrists were in Ouyang Feng's hands. Ouyang Feng saw the boat that brought Huang Rong had already gone far away, too far for them to pursue, while the big boat they were on was already blazed. The main mast was burnt and was about to fall down. The deck was extremely chaotic, the boat would sink any minute. His only hope right now was the small lifeboat in Hong Shigong's control. So he loudly shouted, "Stinky beggar! Miss Huang is in my hand. Do you see her?" He lifted Huang Rong high in the air. By that time the sea was bright red with the fire from the boat. Hong Shigong and Go Jing could see her clearly. Hong Shigong was very indignant. "Again he is using a dirty trick to get this boat. Hang! I am going to get Ronger back." Go Jing saw the boat was almost burnt down. "I am coming too," he said. "No! You stay and guard this boat, don't let the old poison take it away," Hong Shigong said. "Yes," Go Jing said and exerted his strength to pull the oar. By that time the big boat was motionless on the sea surface, so with only several pulls they have come close to the big boat. Hong Shigong kicked the small boat and his body flew toward the big boat. Stretching his left hand out he grabbed the boat's edge with his strong fingers, and then catapulted his body upward and somersaulted toward the deck. Ouyang Feng was still holding Huang Rong's wrists. "Stinky beggar, what do you want?" he said, smiling ferociously. Hong Shigong cursed him. "Come. Let us fight another 1,000 stances." Swish, swish, swish. He sent 3 palm attacks toward Ouyang Feng's face. Ouyang Feng was shrewd. He pushed Huang Rong's body forward as a shield, forcing Hong Shigong to retract his attacks. Ouyang Feng had sealed Huang Rong's acupoint, so she was paralyzed. Hong Shigong loudly shouted, "Old poison, you are shameless. Quickly release her and let her go. You and I will fight here to decide victory or defeat." How could Ouyang Feng release his prisoner so easily? But he saw his nephew was continuously pushed backward by the fire. He threw Huang Rong toward him and called out, "Go to the small boat first." Ouyang K caught Huang Rong, then looked downward to see Go Jing waiting on the small boat down below. He thought the small boat was really too small. If he jumped down carrying a person, he might cause the boat to turn upside down, so he found a thick rope. Tying it to the mast he used his right hand to slide down onto the small boat while holding Huang Rong with his left. Go Jing was relieved to see Huang Rong on the small boat. He did not know that Huang Rong's acupoint was sealed. His attention was focused on his master and Ouyang Feng fought a fierce battle on the blazing deck. He was so worried about his master's safety that his gaze was fixed on the fight and he forgot to speak to Huang Rong. Both Hong Shigong and Ouyang Feng demonstrated their excellence in martial arts. While leaping around to avoid falling wood and rope they counter-attacked each other. Hong Shigong had a slight advantage in that his body was still wet from swimming into the small boat earlier, while Ouyang Feng's clothes and hair had caught a little bit of fire here and there. Those two people's martial arts were in par. To begin with, a slight advantage was enough for Hong Shigong to gain an upper hand. Ouyang Feng was forced to step back bit by bit until his back was very close to the cabin, while his clothes and beard started to catch fire. He wanted to jump into the sea, but Hong Shigong did not give him any slack. If he tried to jump and thus divert his attention from the fight, he might be seriously wounded or even worse, dead. Ouyang Feng became very anxious and it seemed like defeat was imminent. Hong Shigong also realized that he would certainly win this time, and that boosted his confidence. But then another thought came into his mind: if I forced him to enter the fire and die, that won't do me any good. He has obtained the 9-yin altered manual from Jinger, he won't die satisfied before he practices that manual. Why don't I let him go this time? Thereupon he laughed and said, "Old poison, I let you go this time. Quickly jump into the boat." Ao Feng looked at him strangely, then turning his body he jumped into the sea. Hong Shigong was about to follow when suddenly Ao Feng flew back up. Hold on. Now my body is also wet. We are on a level ground. Let us fight again to decide victory or defeat. Holding onto the boat's edge he swung his body up and landed on the deck. Wonderful! Wonderful! Hong Shigong said, I have a satisfying fight today. With him sending his fist forward, the two people were engaged in a fierce battle one more time. Wronger, do you see how fierce the old poison is? Go Jing asked. Huang Rong's IQ point was still sealed, so of course she was not able to answer. Do you think I should go up there and help Master to come down here? The boat is about to sink, Go Jing said again. Still no answer from Huang Rong. Go Jing turned his head to see Ao Anke was hugging Huang Rong. He became angry and shouted, Take your hands off. It was with great difficulty that Ao Anke finally able to touch Huang Rong's hands. How could he let go that easily? Smiling he said, If you move, I am going to hack her brain out with my palm. Go Jing did not even think, he swept the oar in his hand horizontally. Ao Anke ducked to avoid this attack, but Go Jing sent his palm with a whistling sound toward his head. Ao Anke was forced to let Huang Rong go, he swung his head back to avoid this attack. Go Jing's fists moved simultaneously, one downward, the other upward, both aimed toward Ao Anke's head. Ao Anke realized this small boat was not the best place to fight. While the enemy attacked fiercely, he stood up and sent a stance from his spirit snake fist technique, his hand swept horizontally. Go Jing extended his left arm to parry, but suddenly Ao Anke's fist curved upward and turning into a palm slapped Go Jing hard on his cheek. This hit was really heavy. Go Jing's head was spinning because of it. But he realized the danger he was in, so he opened his eyes and saw the second attack was coming. Ao Anke's movement resembled a wine gourd with two successive bends. Go Jing avoided this attack by throwing his head backward while sending his right arm forward to counterattack. But because his head was moving backward, this attack of his was not effective. Luckily he had learned the mutual hands combat technique from Zuba Tong, so both his left and right hands could move independently of each other. This time his left hand followed his right with a different stance coming toward the opponent. Ao Anke's hand was still coming toward Go Jing, hence Go Jing's arms were surrounding his hand. With a crack sound Ao Anke's bone was broken. Actually Ao Anke's martial arts skill was not under Mayu, Wang Chuyi or Shatong Tian. No matter which technique he used, he should be able to defeat Go Jing in a fair battle. It was just that Go Jing's techniques were more bizarre than any other techniques he had seen that he fell under Go Jing's hands twice. Ao Anke fell onto the small boat's deck. Go Jing did not pursue his opponent. He quickly took Huang Rong's yielding body and unsealed her IQ point. Lucky for him when Ao Feng sealed her IQ point he did not use too much energy. He was trying to conserve his energy because he anticipated Hong Shigong's attack, otherwise Go Jing would not be able to unseal the Western poison sealed IQ point. Huang Rong came to her senses, quickly help Shifu. She called out. Go Jing lifted up his head to see his master and Ao Feng were engaged in a close hand-to-hand combat like they were dancing around amidst the blazing fire. The sound of the wind generated by their movements was intermingled with the sound of burning and cracking and falling debris all over them. Suddenly a loud crack was heard, the boat's body broke. The stern was slowly sinking into the sea and vanished into the dark water. The bow was lighter, but slowly it sank nonetheless. Go Jing took his oar and started paddling to get the small boat closer with the intention of helping his master. Hong Shigong's feet got into the water first. His clothes had been dried out by the fire, while Ao Feng's were still wet from the sea earlier. So this time the western poison gained an upper hand against the northern beggar. Hong Shigong did not want to surrender so easily, he fought with all his might. At that moment the mainmast broke and fell down. Two people hurriedly jumped backwards, so they were separated by a burning mast. Ao Feng fetched his snake staff and jumped over the burning mast. Hong Shigong immediately drew the bamboo stick from his waist and fended off the attack. They were fighting barehanded ferociously before, so imagine how fierce the battle had become now that both were wielding weapons. Go Jing held the oar in his hands, ready to jump on board. He was very concerned about his master's safety, yet watching two people's wonderful weapon techniques he was carried away, clucking his tongue and praising unceasingly. There was a saying among the martial arts practitioners, 100 days to master a blade, 1,000 days to master a spear, 10,000 days to master a sword, showing that sword technique was the most difficult to learn. However, when the martial artists had reached perfection, each would develop his or her own unique skill. Then the difference between various weapons would be minuscule. 20 years ago during the sword meet of Mount Hua, both Hong Shigong and Ao Feng had already admired each other's martial arts very much. Even using swords, it was very difficult for them to defeat the other. Now both did not use any sword anymore. Hong Shigong wielded a bamboo stick which he carried anywhere he went, as a token of the authority of his position as a beggar clan leader. The bamboo was pliable but hard to break. Compared to a sword, it was about 1 foot longer. His skill in external martial art was superb. He was able to impart an incredible strength to the flexible weapon in his hands, increasing its might tremendously. Ao Feng's snake staff was also unique in that he combined the cudgel, stick, and spear techniques. The movements were complicated. The staff head was carved in the form of a human head. Its mouth grinned ferociously, looked very scary. 2 rows of sharp teeth inside its mouth were covered with poison. The head danced around like a ghost ready to strike its victim. On top of that, there was a secret button on the staff that when pressed the head would shoot some poison toward the enemy. If those weren't enough, fiercer still were the 2 snakes wrapped around the staff. They were alive and able to make unpredictable moves. Very difficult to guard against. 2 people exchanged palms and weapons, unfolding their respective unique skill. Ao Feng had a slight advantage in terms of weaponry, but Hong Shigong was the leader of beggars everywhere, and beggars were experts in catching snakes. His bamboo stick danced amidst the snake staff movements, parried every move that came his way, but also took advantage of an opening in the opponent's offensive line, striking the snake staff's vital point. Ao Feng moved his staff very fast, to make it difficult for the opponent to have an accurate aim. He knew Hong Shigong meant to kill the snakes on his staff. He did not activate the secret device on his staff for fear that his reputation would be ruined. Hong Shigong still had a unique skill set belonging to the beggar clan, namely the dog-beating stick technique. Its changes were subtle yet marvelous, a very sophisticated stick technique. However, Hong Shigong did not want to use this special skill of his unless in an emergency situation. He was planning on using it on the second sword meet of Mount Hua the following year. So he did not want to let his would-be contender to have an advantage by watching his moves beforehand. Go Jing was standing on the bow of his small boat. Several times he wanted to jump on board to help his master, but those 2 combatants were fighting closely. He realized his own skill was too far below theirs. It would be very difficult to even get close to them. All he could do was staring blankly, unable to do anything.